Clarksville, Tennessee, talking to Marine Corps veteran Edgar Harrell. Now, what Ed is going to talk about today is amazing that he survived it. He was on board the USS Indianapolis when it was sunk July 30th, 1945. And Ed, if you would just start right off, tell us where you were at that night, what you had maybe done for 8 or 10 hours before that, where you were sleeping or whatever.
Well, on July the 29th, I had gotten off a watch at 12 o'clock. I had the 8 to 12 watch. And I got off watch. I went down to the Marine compartment and I got my blanket because I know that I'm going to go topside and sleep because you can't sleep below deck.
Why?
The ship is a steel ship and no air conditioning, and it's 90 plus degrees even with pumped in air. And since we were leaving Guam for the Philippines to prepare for the main invasion of Japan, we were told that we could go unescorted, and they refused us an escort. And
now, you had the atomic bomb on there, or parts to it.
Well,
components.
Not at that point.
No, I mean, you had them.
We had, well, let me back up. July the 26th, 1945, after Okinawa, where we had received a kamikaze plane, we were in the States for repair, and repair was made, and all of a sudden we got word that we were going back to the forward area. We noticed a top secret cargo coming aboard, and it's a big crate that I often say it's like my fish store. It gets bigger every time I tell it, but it was, let's just say it was 12 to 15 feet long, 4 feet high, 4 feet or so wide, and that was picked up by our crane aboard the ship and set on the quarterdeck, and then rolled in then to the port hangar deck. And my Marine captain came to me and said, "Harrell, I want you to station a guard in the port hangar deck and guard that big box." Well, Captain, what do we have? He said, "We don't know what we have." Well, we didn't know. Even the skipper of the ship didn't know what
Captain
we had.
McVeigh did not know.
Captain McVeigh did not know. Captain McVeigh was told that every hour that we delay in getting it to the forward area would cost lives. Well,
it would shorten the war by 1 hour.
That tells us that we've got a hot potato. And then momentarily there were a couple of proposed to be naval Air Force officers coming aboard. And they had a little canister in kind of a little metal cage, and that was brought in and put on the quarterdeck, and a couple of sailors put a rod in that, steel rod, put it up on their shoulders, and carried that up to the forward area into a certain compartment up there. And those two Air Force officers, and that was to be their quarters. Well, my Marine captain said, "Harrell, station a guard on the outside of the hatch." Well, what in the world do they have? Well, he said, "We don't know." Well, a couple of sailors came then, and they took a piece of strap metal and fastened that to the deck, welded it to the deck over the top of that little crate and so on. Well, I'll get ahead of my story and say that what was in that crate was half of the uranium that America owned at that time. The other half was still back in the States. And those two proposed to be Air Force officers were not Air Force officers. They were scientists from Los Alamos, New Mexico. Now, on July the 16th, when we picked that up, that morning they had not detonated the big blast at
they hadn't ignited it, yeah,
at White Sands Desert, but that happened on that particular morning, July the 16th.
So you dropped this off in Tinian,
and we were to deliver that cargo to our B-29 base on the island of Tinian, which was 5,400 miles away. We made that in a heavy cruiser. We made that in 10 days, and yet we even stopped off in Pearl and took on supplies and took on some fuel. But we made that in 10 days, 540 miles a day.
What was the rumor?
Cruiser.
What was the rumor on the ship as to what it might be?
Rumors? I know, no doubt there was all kinds of rumors, but no one had the foggiest idea.
Okay.
The only thing that because we did not get word on July the 16th that morning that they detonated the big first atomic blast at Los Alamos. But then after a day or two, then others were hearing that, but no one knew that the Indianapolis had that. Even after we unloaded it, we had the foggiest idea. Well, anyway, we delivered that on July the 26th. And then we backed up from Tinian Island to Guam, which was CENTPAC, or Central Pacific Command. And Captain McVeigh asked for his sailing orders, and they tell him that he's to go to the Philippines to prepare for the main invasion of Japan. Well, we pretty much knew that would be our destination, because our ship was the flagship of Admiral Spruance, and the scuttlebutt was that the main invasion of Japan would have taken place in November '45. So we weren't surprised that we were to go to the Philippines. But Captain McVeigh asked for an escort, and they tell him, you don't need an escort. But they were lying to us. They could have said, you need an escort, because 4 days ago we lost a destroyer right out in that area that you're going to be traversing through, and we lost a U.S.S. Underhill. We lost 129 boys, but they tell McVeigh you don't need an escort. But they were lying to him like everything. They could have said, you need an escort because we've broken the Japanese code and we know everything that they're doing, but we don't want them to know that we know.
Right.
And so they send us out unescorted, and in Captain McVeigh's sailing orders, he could zigzag at his discretion. In other words, in the daytime you zigzag, that's just standard procedure, but at night, if it's sufficiently dark, then use your discretion, and you can cease zigzagging if it's sufficiently dark.
Did he zigzag during the day?
Oh yes, we zigzag during the day. So anyway, we leave Guam on the way to the Philippines, but 3 days out of Guam, on the night of July the 29th, just after midnight, I got off a watch at midnight. I had the 8 to 12 watch. I got off a watch and I went below deck and I got my blanket, because I'm going to come topside. I'm going to sleep right out on the open deck. The night before, I'd slept.
Yeah, again, this is an artist's conception of what it looked like the night the Indianapolis got hit. Is that correct, Ed?
That's right. I was sleeping under the barrels of number 1 turret, about 60 feet from the bow of the ship, of which about 45 feet of the bow was cut off with the first torpedo, the second torpedo back close to the marine compartment, and the third explosion was the magazine under number 2 turret. Now, number 2 turret and number 1 turrets are big 8-inch guns, so there's a lot of munitions down below that exploded and went through the top. Now, the ship went down in 12 minutes.
Okay. So the ship sank in about 12 minutes.
Ship went down about 12 minutes. Now, I'm sleeping there under the barrels of number 1 turret, and I had no doubt just begun to doze off to sleep. Now, my bed was my blanket right down on the steel deck, and I took off my shoes and I used the arch of my shoes somewhat as my pillow, and I put my blanket over it, and then I lay down on that shoe and I kind of covered my head with my blanket, because we're moving at about 17 knots or like 15 miles an hour, so you've got a little breeze, and I'm just wrapped up just a little bit. And then about 14 minutes after midnight, a massive explosion. When I say a massive explosion, that first torpedo cut about 45 feet of that long, sleek bow off. When I say cut it off, it wasn't there. And then the second torpedo then was back aft to me, a little ways back, close to the marine compartment. And then the third major explosion was the magazine under number 2 turret.
So you were literally right in between the two torpedoes.
I was in between all the fire, and different ones would say, well, how did you manage not to be burned? Well, I was burned some. I had some eyelashes and some hair singed, but nothing serious to compare with many others, because I'm wrapped in my blanket, and that first torpedo with all that water that went up with the fire, with the explosion, all that water comes back down, and I'm drenched. I mean, literally everything but drowned in the water that came back down. And then about as long as it took Commander Hoshimoto to say fire 1, 2 seconds later, fire 2, he fired 6 torpedoes, hit us with 2. And then I began to take inventory and realize, hey, the bow of the ship is cut off. Then I could, if you could just visualize, about 45 feet of that bow is cut off, so about 35 feet wide and 3 or 4 decks down, it's just open. And we are moving about the 17 knots, so we become a funnel. And that water is coming in and breaking the bulkheads down below, and all the hatches are open. I mean, we're traveling wide open below decks, and all the hatches to the top side are open. And so I realized just in an instant nearly that this ship is doomed. I didn't know what had happened, but I surmised it had to have been a torpedo.
Now, could you actually see that the deck was gone?
I could, well, I could say that I could look, and what normally I would have seen,
you didn't see.
It isn't there, but I'm not going over to look over to see, but momentarily I realized that deck is gone, and then I could hear the bulkheads breaking below.
Oh my God.
You could only imagine, you know, a ship of that magnitude moving, 17 mile an hour, and all that water coming in, and the bulkheads are breaking down below, and I could hear that. I mean, the ship it's a death blow that I could hear, and I realized that my emergency station is back midship, back at the quarterdeck. And my orders, standing orders, is to make my way to my emergency station to receive orders as to what I'm to do under any circumstance. That would be my first reaction. But as I started to make my way back to my emergency station, there were those that were coming out of the forward area from interior out on the open deck, and most of that was officers' quarters. And as the officers were coming out, you could see that here it is right after midnight, and they're in their night clothing, which maybe at most would be a pair of skivvies, and they were flash burned. You could see flesh hanging from arms and from their face, and they were pleading, you know, with someone to give them some assistance. Well, really there's nothing that I could do, but that's not my responsibility either. And I'm to make my way as quickly as possible to my emergency station, which back midship, nearly 100 yards back. But there were many, many, many officers that were severely burned and nearly beyond any hope of any kind, other than someone to give them a Kapok life jacket and pitch them overboard. Okay, I get to the quarterdeck and I realize...
Did people do that? Did people do that?
I don't know what
you don't
happened, no. But I realized that I don't have a Kapok life jacket either. And I know that I've got to get to the quarterdeck. And I get to the quarterdeck, my Marine lieutenant was there, and Lieutenant Stauffer.
Now you're just in undershorts and a t-shirt.
No, I had on my clothing.
Okay.
Because I only took off my shoes and my cap, and I wrapped in my blanket, sleeping right out on the open deck, and we're moving in a breeze, you know, like a 15 mile an hour wind.
Dick only had his undershorts on.
And
my friend Dick Thaler.
Many that were internally, I don't know whether they had air conditioning or not in the officers' quarters, maybe not, but at least they were burned. And okay, I make my way finally to the quarterdeck, and my Marine lieutenant was there, and I looked at the big canvas bags of Kapok life jackets hanging up around, and knowing that my Kapok jacket is down in my locker in the Marine compartment, and I asked Lieutenant Stauffer permission to cut those Kapok life jackets down, and he said, not until we get word to abandon ship. Well, the ship is sinking. In fact, nearly by now, the ship had taken on so much water with that bow open, with the funnel up there, and the second torpedo back close to midship, that now it's listing to the starboard to where water is nearly on the quarterdeck. And after a little bit then, I would say, well, the ship went down in 12 minutes, so let's just say after maybe 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, now the first 100 yards of the ship is already under.
It's underwater.
I mean, it's not there. It's gone. And the ship is listing to the starboard, and then after it fills the first half of the ship, it begins to erect itself and begins to stand on its nose and then to kind of turn to the starboard and go under. Well, after...
So the screws were up in the air.
The screws are up in the air, yes. And I recall that after I asked permission to cut down the Kapok life jackets, and Lieutenant Stauffer said not until we get word to abandon ship. Well, the ship is sinking. And then I recognized the Navy commander as he came through the hatch, and as he came through the hatch, I could see that he was burned severely. And he was pleading for some help, and some sailors said, "Get the commander a life jacket." So they began to cut down those Kapok life jackets, and I managed to reach in and get me a Kapok life jacket. And then all communication is knocked out, all power is knocked out. No communication of any kind, no electricity of any kind. The only lights that we had was basically the infernos from below deck, maybe coming through some of the hatches. You could see some lights here or there.
Now, are you still on the ship?
Sir?
Are you still on the ship?
I'm still on the ship, yes. And so finally, we're waiting for a word to trickle down from the captain to abandon ship. Well, there's no PA system, no communication. And finally, word begins to trickle down that the captain had given orders to abandon ship. Well, some had already gone overboard because the ship is sinking. In fact, by now, if you can visualize that the quarterdeck midship is listing to where you cannot stand on the quarterdeck. In fact, normally the quarterdeck there on that starboard side would be 8 feet above waterline, but there's water on the quarterdeck. So the ship is listing so much that water's on the quarterdeck, and you can hardly stand on the deck of the ship. And then finally, word trickles down to abandon ship.
Now, did you see men that were also you'd seen them burnt? Had they been shot? Or, I mean, hit with explosions at all? Did you see trauma or just the burns?
If they were close enough to the explosion, they didn't live through that. No. Basically, all I saw was those that were internally someplace, and with that number 2 turret, with that magazine exploding, and all of the heat from that, different ones that survived said that the steel decks were everything but red hot. If you touched the deck with your hands, part of your skin was left there. And so you can imagine that many of those that were there in their skivvies, and that flash burned then, and once they got out in the open, maybe many of those, yes, may have made it into the water, but
they didn't live very long.
It's just a matter of an hour or two. And I recall that finally, word came to abandon ship, and there probably was 100 boys on the quarterdeck. And they rushed to the high side to get off. And I recall making my way, thinking that, this is the end of life. And as I looked out into the blackness of the night and looked out at all that oil on the water, and I'm to go into that, and not knowing, what the next hour might bring. Is this the end of life? And may I say, as you hold on to that rail and others were getting off, and I'm sure that I was scared, maybe not more than anybody else, but I'm scared to death. I look out at the blackness of the night, and I don't want to die. And may I say that there's times when you pray, and there's times when you pray, and now is the time to pray. And I prayed, and I tell the Lord, I made him all kinds of promises. I don't want to die. I've got mom and dad and 6 younger brothers, and older sister and a younger sister, and a certain brunette that promised that she would wait for me. And may I say that she waited Now this was in 1945, but 1947 we were married, and we are celebrating our 65th wedding anniversary this July.
Well, congratulations.
But here I'm pleading with the Lord to give me some assurance that I'm going to make it. And as I stepped over the rail and stepped down close to the water, I had that kapok jacket on, but I didn't fasten it in the straddles because I knew that I'm going to jump in feet first into that water, that ½ inch of oil. I don't want that in my face, and I jump in feet first, and I begin to come up and get my head above that oil and to swim away from the ship hurriedly and looking back to see that the first 100 yards is under and that fantail is coming high in the air. Those big screws are still turning.
They're still turning, huh?
And I can see boys as they made their way to any place to get off the ship, which was the fantail. Everything else was underwater, and they were jumping off. Now they're looking down into the blackness of the night, and we down here are looking up with a silhouette of some light coming from the ship explosions up above, many, many explosions. And we could see boys as they were jumping off, and some were jumping into those screws
big brass
that
screws
were still turning. And then finally we see the ship as it turns to the starboard and goes under. Those screws still turning. Boys are still getting off the last minute. And then the ship now is gone.
Now you stepped off it. The ship almost left you. I mean, the ship.
It nearly left me. Another 2 minutes it would have left me.
Yes.
And no doubt would have pulled me under with it. But anyway, now I see it as it goes under, and I take inventory of that little group of boys that I swam out to, which later we tried to determine that, hey, there's 80 of us, and some were injured. There were 2 other Marines, and one was so injured, he had been blown against a bulkhead, and he had, I'm sure, multiple breaks in his body. He didn't last till daybreak. And I'm going to get ahead of my story and tell you something. For these many, many years, I've wondered who that new Marine was that came aboard in Pearl when we went through. And here we had about 6 new Marines. And here is a Marine with me that night, Spooner and myself. And I tried to help that Marine, not knowing who he was, but knowing he's one of our new Marines that just had been aboard maybe these 16 days or so. And I wanted to help him, and he did not want me to move him at all. He had a kapok life jacket on, and he pleaded with me, don't bother me, don't touch me. And I watched him as he gave up and as he finally succumbed. And I wondered, through the years, I wondered, who is that Marine? I had no pictures of anyone until 2 months ago. 2 months ago, I get word from the state legislature in Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa. They wondered, do you have any information on any of the survivors or non-survivors of the Indianapolis? And I said, I have the record of the 30 from Iowa, of which 26 did not survive, 3 that did survive. I have no records of them since then. This has been these 70-something, 67 years or so. But I have the record of who their parents were at our first reunion in 1960 and the towns that they were from. Okay, finally I get a letter and an email asking if I knew Leland Charles Hubbard. And I said he was one of the new Marines, but I can't place him because he'd only been aboard just those few days. And he's not in my picture of the 39 Marines because it was taken before he came aboard, and the granddaughter said, "I've got a picture of him when he went in the Marine Corps." And a few days before he went aboard the Indianapolis, "I'm going to send you that picture." I get that picture and I look, and I had to say, that's the guy that I was with, that I tried to help. And I wondered, should I tell them? And I asked others, should I tell them? They said, by all means. Here, 67 years later, they would like to put some closure to the fact that he was not out there swimming with the sharks and eaten by sharks and so on. The only thing to do is to tell them. And here, finally, I got the picture and I look, and I said, Lord, that has to be the man. And so I call them and I tell them, Hubbard was the guy that I was with that last hour or two in the water, together with my Marine buddy Spooner. Well, anyway, there were 3 of we Marines.
And there was 80 in your group?
80 in the group. Many of them did not have Kapok life jackets, and they were hanging on to someone else, and we managed to hold together, stay together through that rest of that first night. And then the first day. Now the first day, we thought, rescue will come today, because we were supposed to meet the USS Idaho for a gunnery practice at about 11 o'clock the first day. But we found out much later that the message that they received was garbled, and they didn't make it out, and they didn't call for a repeat, and therefore they were not looking for us. So no one's looking for us.
Yeah.
And so that first morning, we had company. At any given time, you could look out and you could see a big fin swimming around and around and around the group, and maybe more than one fin. And yet, seemingly, they weren't going to attack our group. But it isn't long till our group of 80, you can imagine, we're trying to stay together, and we come upon a swell 10 or 12 feet, and we are elevated, and then we begin to break apart, and then we're scattered. So we determined that we have to stay together. And so we form a circle, and we take our kapok jackets and hook onto a buddy, and we form a circle, and we try to keep those without kapok jackets, or those that were injured, we try to keep them inside the circle. And we were able to do that for a period of time. And then, lo and behold, after a bit, someone began maybe to hallucinate. Maybe he was injured and he has a high temperature. And even sometimes the first day, maybe some would be so thirsty they would dare to drink some of the salt water.
Tell people what happened.
Then they would begin to hallucinate, and they could imagine that they see an oasis out there. And they would holler out at others, look, look, there's a ship out there. I see the ship. I'm going to swim to it. And here they would leave, and they would get out 50 yards or so, and you'd hear a blood-curdling scream, and you look and you see that kapok Joe under. It's not there. And then momentarily, that, like a fish cork, that kapok would bring that body back up, but you dare not go and check it now, because you see those fins out there. Many sharks are coming and attacking and coming around that blood. Sometime later, though, you wonder, could that be your buddy out there? So you finally check, and maybe someone would check and take off his dog tags and find out that, he's been disemboweled, or the bottom torso is gone. Mm-hmm. Well, that's going to take place many, many times these next 4 days. But even this first day, and so...
Are you covered in oil now, Ed?
Oh, yes. All of us were covered in oil. I mean, there's no way, no way to leave the ship without going into all of that oil that's on the water.
I want to say,
Different ones would say a half an inch thick oil. Well, no one measured it, but it was a lot of oil.
I want to say something quick. I was a boilerman in the 60s, and we used this black oil. It wasn't oil like, I want people to understand, it wasn't like a quart of oil that you'd put in a car.
No.
It was a black goo.
Right.
I just want people to know that it wasn't nice, clean oil like we would open a quart of oil.
No. Well, okay, going through that first day, we lost several boys because here it is, the first day, 110-degree weather, and you're swimming nearly constantly, you're bareheaded, and you are so thirsty, and you pray for the night, and then nighttime comes, and at night, you know, there's a 15, 17 mile an hour breeze, and you're wet, and you're chilled through. And some of the boys that didn't have on clothing to keep their body temperature kind of encased a bit, you know, they're going to get hypothermia. The water's about 85 degrees, but how long do you have to stay in 85-degree water before your body succumbs to 85 degrees? And lo and behold, when it hits about 84, then you've had it. Instead of freezing, you are imagining that you're warm, you're comfortable, and you begin to lose it. Well, that takes place much that first day and that
people just losing their minds.
Second night. Come again?
They just lost their minds.
They just lost their mind. Now the second day, still no help. We see planes flying over 30,000 feet, but no one's looking for us. No one could see anything down there anyhow, 30,000 feet. We see our B-29s bombing Tokyo. No one's looking for us. But even the second day, boys, we're so thirsty. You can imagine 110 degrees in the sun, swimming nearly constantly, having to swim, and you're so thirsty. So what do? Some sailors would tear off some of their clothing and they would think, maybe we could strain some of this salt. And a couple of sailors would hold that cloth, and someone would put some water up in that, and the sailor would put his head under that, and he'd drink a little of that supposedly strained salt water. And he said, not too bad, you know, 85 degrees, it was wet. But in a little bit, within the hour, you could see what it has done to the mind. I had a sailor come up to me and said, "Hey, Marine, see that island over there? I just came from over there. Captain Parks, Lieutenant Stauffer, he knew several of the Marines. They're over there. They're having a picnic. Want you to come over there." Oh, it was so convincing, but the mind said, that can't be. That can't be. And then I see him swim away, and as he got 50, 75 yards out, then there again, that blood-curdling scream, and that kapok goes under, and then all the sharks come. Now that's going to happen many times, even the second day now. And by the second day, my buddy Spooner, the other Marine that was with me, the only one now, Spooner had gone into the water head first, and he had all that oil in his eyes. Now, what do? You've got half-inch thick of that old gooey black oil in your eyes, and how are you going to get it out? You're going to rub it out, you're going to rub that oil into your eyeballs, then you look up at the sun, and that salt water begins to powder, and you rub your eyes, and his eyes were two big sores. And he said, "Harrell, we see those planes going over. No one's looking for us." And he said, "I can't stand this anymore." And he was in misery with those eyes. And he said, "I'm going to commit suicide." "Spooner, you're not going to do it," said saying. And he convinced me that he was determined to do so. And I said, Spooner, there's only 2 Marines in this group, and there's going to be 2 Marines when help comes, and help is going to come. We're going to be rescued sooner or later. And, well, I was having trouble with Spooner, so I just got a hold of him, and I turned his back to mine, and I took his kapok jacket, and I hooked it onto mine, and I swam with him through that second night. And sometime now, the third day, we've lost boys. We lost boys. By the third day at noon, there's only 17 of us.
Out of your group of about 80.
And my group of 80, only 17 of us. And I often say, I travel all over the country telling the story. Been in 27 states in the last 5 years. And I often say there's no such thing as an atheist in foxholes. And there were no atheists out there. Everyone was pleading, God, if you're out there, I don't want to die. One of those sailors said, I've got a son back home I've never seen. I don't want to die. God, we have to have help or we aren't going to make it. And so anyone that would pray audibly prayed. We prayed out loud. We pleaded with the Lord because we know we cannot make it anymore. And here the third day at noon, we came up on a swell, and lo and behold, look, 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 there's a raft, there's a raft. And we holler. You know how your voice can carry on the water. We hollered, and they responded in English, and we knew that it was our buddies. And we yelled and screamed, and finally they began to come into our group, and as they got closer and closer and closer, we could see that's a little raft. No one is on the raft. No one is on the raft. The raft with 5 sailors around it. And it consisted of 2 40-millimeter ammunition boxes and 2 or 3 old like slatted potato crates or orange crates. They had those lashed together, and they had taken kapok life jackets off of boys that had already expired and put them up on that little raft. They'd squeezed them out. You know, an old sponge won't hold any more water after a period of time, but it will. You take it and you squeeze it out, it'll hold more water. So as they came into our group, they said, we've got to get close enough to the Philippines that someone will spot us, or we aren't going to make it. And we see that they've got kapok life jackets, and they tell us that they've taken them off of boys that already expired. And they offer us a squeezed out, so to speak, half dry or half wet kapok life jacket. And we exchanged life jackets, squeeze ours out. 2 buddies would take those kapok jackets and twist and twist and twist and get all the water out we could and put them up on that little raft. And in that 110 degree sun, they're going to be drying out some. Well, there were 17 and those 5 sailors. Anyone want to join us? We're going to go to the Philippines. I say to my buddy Spooner, Spooner, I'm going to go with them. He said, Harrell, if you go, I'm going to go. I had him tied on me the night before, and he said, if you go, Harrell, I'll go. So here 2 Marines joined 5 sailors, and the other 15 sailors, they said, you're crazy, you're not going to swim to the Philippines. I said, yeah, but there was 80 of us, and there's only 17 of us, and there's time to do something, and I'm going to go with them. And Spooner said, I'm going too, Harrell. So 2 Marines joined 5 sailors. We said farewell to our buddies. They said, you're crazy, a sharks will get you. But anyway, here we start, and we're just holding on to that raft. No one's on the raft. We're just plugging away, and we made some headway. And then later in the afternoon, before the sun gets too low, we came up on a swell, and I could look out at the starboard, and I said, look, look, look! There's an old crate or something out there. What would the possibility be? Some food or something out there? And we look at that at different times. We're up and it's down and so on. And finally there's a compelling influence that go and see what there might be in that. And finally, I'm determined, I'm going to go. And my buddy say, a shark might get you. I said, yeah, but we haven't seen any sharks around us, not in the last few hours. And so here with my Kapok life jacket, I'm plugging away and I make my way out to that crate. And as I got closer and closer, you know, I'm praying. I'm praying for food. I'm praying for water. Anything, anything. And as I got closer and as I saw those potatoes floating in that little crate, I didn't pause and say, thank you, Lord, for what I'm about to partake of. But in desperation, I reached for that first potato, and as I got a hold of it, as that rot began to squeeze through my fingers, I thought, rotten potatoes. But you know what? As I squeezed that rot, squeezed through my fingers, and then, lo and behold, the heart of that potato was solid. I often say when I speak in ladies that are to ladies, you know what rotten potatoes smell like. I know what they taste like. So I took that potato, I peeled it with my hands and then peeled it with my teeth. I don't spit out all that rot. I'm desperate for water. I'm desperate for food. And I ate a little bit of maybe a couple of potatoes. And then I began to think like the ant, I may be out here a while longer, so I squeezed off the rot off of those potatoes and I feel my dungaree pockets full. And then there's still more there. And I began to swim back toward my buddies and they see me nibbling on something and making my way back and they hollered out, what is it? What is it? Rotten potatoes. Well, they leave the raft and they came out and joined me, and I often say, you know, we had a little picnic. Those 5 sailors and that other Marine spooner, we
had a little picnic, huh?
We have a little picnic, and all we had to eat was half-rotten potatoes. But
so you had your picnic with your potatoes.
Okay, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So from there, sometime late that evening, there was another group that came into our group, and they said, we've got to swim to the Philippines. Well, we're trying. And it was Lieutenant McKissick and 5 or 6 more sailors, and they joined us that night. And the next morning, I don't know what happened to the raft. I didn't even know what happened to Spooner, but the next morning, I was with Lieutenant McKissick and 1 other sailor.
So Spooner went away over the night?
And we didn't know where the others were. It's a long story now, but anyway, I'm with McKissick and 1 other sailor, and sometime later that afternoon, I checked the 1 sailor, and his head had dropped into the water, but he was still alive. And I got him to respond to me, and he did so, but comatose. And finally, about the 3rd time, his head had already dropped in the water, and he's gone. So it's just McKissick and myself. And then sometime later now, our Kapok jackets are gone again, and we're seated in our Kapok jackets. They won't hold our heads out of the water. So we have them down under us, and we're seated in them. And now we're having to keep swimming all the time to just keep our heads above water. And then all of a sudden, I hear a plane. I holler out McKissick, I hear a plane, I hear a plane. And of course, here is a plane flying about 5,000–6,000 feet, going to fly directly over us. We wave our hands, we do everything imaginable to attract his attention. But if he knew we were down there, we had deer hunter orange on, impossible for him to see us. But let me tell you what happened. Lieutenant Gwynn was flying that Ventura
now, this is the 4th day?
And as he is flying over
us... Is this the 4th day?
What?
This is the 4th day?
That's the 4th day. Evening of the 4th day. Lieutenant Gwynn having trouble with his radio antenna, and he says to the co-pilot, take over, I'm going to go back and pull in this radio antenna. and put something, stabilizer on it, because it's just flipping back and forth. And as he opened the bomb bay door, he looks down momentarily, and what does he see? 3,000 feet or so down there. He saw an oil slick. He rushed back to take over control of the plane, and the crew wondered, what did he see? They said, what is it? What is it? He said, look down there. And they looked down there, and all they could see was an oil slick.
Now, the only reason they could see it, they were looking straight down now instead of out the window.
That's right. He was looking straight down as he opened the bomb bay door to reel in that antenna. And so now he asked the crew to load the bombs. They're coming in on a bomb and run. We see him. Thank you, Lord. Thank you. Look, he sees us. He's coming in. We're waving. We're so elated. He did not see us. He only saw the oil slick, thinking that it was a submarine. He loaded the bombs. He comes in on the bomb
he was
and
going to
run.
make a bomb.
When he gets down in 2,000 feet, he sees 15-foot sharks down in the water. And then finally, a little further down, he sees movement. He sees bodies. He sees sharks attacking bodies. He radios then for help out of Palau. He radios there, and a Lieutenant Adrian Marks and a PBY that could come and land. He gets him, and he stays and hovers us in that Ventura with wheels on it that cannot land until Adrian Marks comes in a PBY. The PBY comes, he picks up 56. Now, before dark. A PBY won't hold 56. But I say this, it will if you tie 7 out on the wings. And so 7 of us.
Were you among them?
I was not among them, but 7 was tied out on the wings. And the first buddy that I saw when I got aboard the plane, USMC with his big sore eyes, was Spooner. And I saw Spooner, what he was doing. He had a can of green beans, and he knocked a hole in it down on the deck of the ship. And he turns that up, and he's drinking the bean juice. And I said, Spooner, how about some of your bean juice? Well, he didn't know who I was. He couldn't see me. And he told me where I could get off. I said, Spooner, you don't know who this is. This is Harrell. Well, when I said this is Harrell, he fell across a buddy and spilled some of his bean juice. Well, a long story short, from there, I'm picked up by the PBY, ended up in Palau in a hospital, later in a hospital in Guam.
Now, how long were you actually in the water, Ed?
I was in the water 4.5 days.
So 96, about 110 hours?
Something like that.
Okay.
And I finally get back to the States on October the 3rd, after the shipwreck, July 30. I'm in the hospital with a perforated appendix, 11,800,000 units of penicillin, 29 days before they could operate. I'm in the hospital Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. Finally, I'm out of the hospital July the 16th, 1946.
Okay.
And then I got out of the Marine Corps July the 17th, 1946, in Great Lakes.
Do you have saltwater ulcers on your neck where that...
I had saltwater ulcers every place, even got some effects of that because I had boils under my arms that were later lanced, but never did properly heal, and they give me problems even yet today.
Mm-hmm.
But yet I had saltwater ulcers every place that your flesh rubbed, or every place your clothing rubbed. You know, an old salt cotton garment rubbing, you know, after a period of time, you know, it rubs to where it's raw flesh, and then all of that oil. And so that was some of the worst, other than I got a back injury somehow. And later when I got out of the Marine Corps, Marine, when did you break your back? I never had a broken back. Yes, you do.
And you didn't even know it?
I didn't know it, but I found out much later after that, yes. So that basically is my story.
Well, Ed, I just want to take a moment to thank you so much for your service, but
You're
also for thanking me.
You're just
I want
so
to
welcome.
thank you for letting me have your story, and I'll
You're
share
just so
it.
welcome.
I'll share it with people at libraries.